The last thing I ever expected was to be standing here in front of you all in wearing the Somali national military uniform. I know that many are wondering how I got to this point, where my journey started. I know that many are wondering why I decided to join the army for a country that I had left at such a young age. For those of you who don't know, I'm the youngest of 3 daughters. My father was a very well-known peace activist who worked in Somalia. His name was Elman, and he was assassinated in 1996 for some of the work that he was doing at the time, in particular with child soldiers and rehabilitation programs. Ironically, one of my father's famous slogan was, "Put down the gun, take the pen." So I know many of you are wondering how I got to this point and what really drove me or motivated me into joining the army. When my father passed away, my mother raised me and my sisters in Canada. And she always raised us to let us know that this isn't a man's world and that you should never allow someone to lower you or belittle you based on your gender, and that not anything that a man can do, I could do as well. If not, I should be able to do it better. And while I was studying university, my mother and my sister decided to come back to Somalia and carry on from my father's legacy, and they started the Elman Peace and Human Rights Center. And that's when they also started some of their programs with gender-based violence victims and response programs. And it was initially for me, I wanted to come visit my mother and my sister. I started volunteering at some of their local centers, and I started to teach non-formal education classes, where I really got the opportunity to meet and to interact with some of the victims that were there and to share some of their stories. It was very difficult because I could tell that a lot of the girls in the class were very discouraged. They felt as though they were less than a man. And eventually it got to the point where I was unable to teach. And I was discouraged in staying in Somalia because for me, I no longer enjoyed what I was doing, and it wasn't as and it didn't feel as meaningful as it did before. Eventually, I ended up, it actually started from a conversation I had with a group of soldiers. And you know, it was an odd conversation, and I jokingly mentioned that, you know, what if I joined the army? And what surprised me is how quick they were to respond, and they said that, you know, no, it's not okay for you to join the army. And if you do decide to join the army, the only jobs that are available for you are more of the domestic roles, such as cooking and cleaning for the troops. And, you know, for me, it surprised me that, you know, 15, 20 young adolescent boys are able to just have that mentality in their head without second guessing or without thinking, okay, what is she capable and what is she able to do? And to me, it was, at that point, I was no longer just, it wasn't that I wanted to join the army, but at that point, I was battling with me versus society, and it became me versus my own culture. And I just really wanted to prove a point. And that is when I decided to take the first step in registering and going to a basic training course. The hard part wasn't, you know, I dealt with a lot of difficulties during my training, but for me, the hardest part was arriving back to Mogadishu, getting off that flight, and, you know, once I arrived back, I got my first AK-47, and it was, and you know, at that point, I was no longer a Canadian girl in Somalia. I felt as though I was a soldier serving my country, and that was far from it. I remember the first time when I got in line and we were given our uniforms. And I was waiting patiently in queue, and then once it was my turn, I remember the distributor, he gave me 2 pair of pants and 1 shirt. And then I asked him, well, where's the other missing shirt? And then he said, no, I gave you 2 pair of pants so you can sew it together and you can make a skirt out of it. And it surprised me, but I knew the challenges that were ahead of me, and I knew where I wanted to reach and where I wanted to go. And that, you see these Land Cruiser vehicles driving around Mogadishu, and it'd be nearly impossible to drive in one of those wearing a skirt. So I told them no, thank you. One pair of pants will do just fine. And people thought I was, they thought I was a bit crazy at the time. Once my family realized that I had committed into joining the army, people were, I think, more confused than anything. They asked me, well, if you're so interested in the military, the army, why don't you serve for the country you were raised in, Canada? And some people asked me, well, if you want to join the army, why not work in the Ministry of Defense, where it's much safer? I knew the consequences that I was going to face, and my biggest worry was my mother. But I think that she knew that it made me very happy, and that for the first time I felt like I had a purpose and I was doing something different. And it was an opportunity for me to carry out my very own legacy, and for me to be able to say, in a few years, this is what I did, and this is what I have achieved. My family was working with responding to a lot of GBV victims and responding to cases that would occur to victims, and whether it's through human rights violations or whether it's through gender-based violence. For me, I wanted to do my part in preventing it. It shouldn't even happen in the first place. Then, always us wanting to respond to when it does happen. I cannot describe word for word what it was like serving in the front line, but I will tell you that it was never easy. For me, I would spend long nights, in the cold, in the detached. Sometimes you'd have, there were times where I would be the only female, and there were hundreds of men around me. And, and there were times where the detaches, the defense forces were very small. There was no laterans that I could use at the time, yet alone taking a shower. There were days where I would be 45 days wearing the one pair of uniforms that I had on, and I was unable to change. I was working with the deputy commander of the Somali National Armed Forces, and he was the head of operations. Our job was probably one of the most difficult parts of the military. We'd spend the majority of our time seeking or searching for the Al-Shabaab itself. And once we'd spend long hours in battle. Once we completed a single battle, then we'd end up being deployed to a different location where we tried to find more Al-Shabaab. But to me, I wasn't just fighting with Al-Shabaab, but I was also fighting for my own respect within my own forces, and to be recognized as a female who's serving her country. There were times that it was very discouraging, where the enemy size would get large, it would get very intense, and there were, I can't lie, there were many times where I felt as though, maybe this time you just won't make it out, maybe this time, you won't be able to go back home. My commander was quoted saying many times, "A girl is moving forward faster than you men. You guys should be ashamed of yourself." And I remember the group of embarrassed soldiers would try to keep up with me keep up with my pace. And it wasn't because I was brave or that I had this motivation in me to fight with Al-Shabaab, but it was also because I was trying to prove a point to my fellow soldiers, and to show them, I am capable. And not only am I capable of being a soldier, but that I am able to be a good soldier. And I think gradually I ended up earning my respect from a lot of the soldiers that I was working with. And I noticed that I earned my respect when troops that weren't familiar with me would see me, and they would be like, oh, there's a girl in the front line. It was no longer me having to defend myself. Sometimes, I'd have some of my troops standing up for me, say, well, yeah, she's a girl, but she's one of us, and she can fight. And it was encouraging for me to see that, it made me feel as though I was getting one step closer to my goal. During my time, I was promoted to a 2-star known as a left lieutenant. I was now a commanding officer. I've traveled to all parts of Somalia: Burakaba, Baidoa, Beledweyne, Marka, Jannale, Johar, Kismayo, you name it, I've probably been there at one point. For me, one of the things I learned during my journey is a new appreciation for power. To most, power is considered based on force or strength. To me, power means someone who's influential, someone who's able to get into other people's minds and actually change the way they think or what they believe. For someone to be able to believe in something and not second guess themselves. Today, I walk around the streets of Mogadishu recognized by men, not because I'm a girl in the military uniform, but because I'm a girl in military uniform and proud of it. And to be a female commanding officer serving for my country, it feels really great. And I believe this is only the beginning for me. It's remarkable to see the number of young women joining the Army today. And I feel like I've done my part in paving the way for them. And the reaction I get from some of the locals is astonishing, and I think it makes my job a lot easier, and it makes me feel happy about from where I got myself today. And I really encourage everyone to do their part, and this is my way of giving back to my country. So.